Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Warrior's Foundation. Staff Sergeant Santiago Ross crouched behind the concrete barrier in Kandahar, his rifle trained on the compound entrance as his team prepared for the final assault. At 34, Santiago had spent 12 years in the army, rising through the ranks on merit earned in the crucible of combat. His dark eyes held the cold focus of a man who'd survived 3 deployments by never showing mercy to enemies who threatened what he protected. The mission succeeded with surgical precision. No American casualties, high-value target eliminated, intelligence gathered. As Santiago debriefed with his commanding officer, he felt the familiar satisfaction of another victory against those who would harm innocent people. Protection of the defenseless wasn't just his job, it was his core identity. Santiago had built his life on unwavering principles forged in the housing projects of East LA, where weakness invited predation and strength demanded respect. His mother, Maria Ross, had raised 5 children alone after his father abandoned them, working 3 jobs while teaching Santiago that family meant everything and betrayal meant nothing. At 18, Santiago had enlisted to escape poverty and found his calling in the military's structured hierarchy. The Army valued the qualities that civilian life had mocked: discipline, loyalty, absolute commitment to mission success. He'd excelled in Ranger training, Special Forces qualification, and leadership development, earning respect through competence rather than politics. His marriage to Roxanne Perry had seemed like a natural progression when he'd returned from his first deployment. She was 22, beautiful, and apparently impressed by his military bearing and steady income. More importantly, she'd claimed to want the same things he did: family, stability, and mutual loyalty. Their daughter Alice had been born 2 years later, a perfect child who inherited Santiago's dark hair and intense focus along with her mother's delicate features. At 8 years old, Alice showed remarkable intelligence and creativity, often spending hours drawing elaborate fantasy worlds while Santiago was deployed. The current deployment to Afghanistan was Santiago's 3rd in 5 years, part of his commitment to special operations missions that kept him overseas for extended periods. The separation was difficult, but Santiago believed he was building a secure future for his family while serving his country's interests. Roxanne's recent communications had been increasingly distant and brief. Phone calls became text messages, video chats were canceled for various emergencies, and her responses to his questions about Alice seemed evasive. Santiago's instincts, honed by years of detecting threats, began registering warning signals he couldn't quite identify. Ross, his team leader, called out, interrupting Santiago's thoughts. "Package for you from home." Santiago accepted the small box from Alice, recognizing his daughter's careful handwriting on the address label. Inside, he found a hand-drawn picture of their family: himself in military uniform, Alice smiling in the middle, and Roxanne standing noticeably apart from them both. The drawing troubled Santiago in ways he couldn't articulate. Alice's artistic skills had always been advanced for her age, but this picture seemed to convey emotions beyond typical childhood expression. His daughter had drawn herself reaching toward him while Roxanne faced away, as if looking towards something outside the frame. A folded note fell from the package, written in Alice's careful cursive: "Daddy, I miss you. Mommy has new friends now. They don't like me very much. I hope you come home soon. Love, Alice." Santiago read the note 3 times, his analytical mind processing implications that civilian fathers might miss. New friends suggested people Alice didn't know well. They don't like me very much indicated hostile or dismissive treatment. Combined with Roxanne's recent communication patterns, the message painted a picture that made Santiago's jaw clench with suppressed anger. He walked to the communications tent and placed a video call home. After several rings, Roxanne answered with obvious reluctance, her appearance disheveled and her manner distracted. "Santiago, this isn't a good time," she began without preamble. "I'm busy with..." "Where's Alice?" Santiago interrupted, noting that his wife looked different somehow. New clothes, styled hair, makeup applied more carefully than usual. "She's around. Playing or something." "Listen, I really can't talk right now." "Get her," Santiago said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that made soldiers follow him into combat zones. Roxanne's expression shifted, perhaps recognizing something dangerous in her husband's tone. "Fine, but make it quick." Minutes passed before Alice appeared on screen, and Santiago immediately noticed she looked thinner than during their last call. Her face seemed gaunt, her eyes held a sadness that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old, and her clothes appeared looser than they should. "Hi, Daddy," Alice said softly, glancing off camera as if checking for approval to speak. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "I'm okay," Alice replied, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm Santiago remembered. "When are you coming home?" "Soon, baby. Are you eating enough? You look a little thin." Alice's eyes darted off camera again before she answered. "Sometimes there's not much food, but I'm okay." Santiago felt ice form in his chest. "What do you mean there's not much food?" Before Alice could respond, Roxanne reappeared and ended the call abruptly. Santiago immediately tried calling back, but his attempts went straight to voicemail. That night, Santiago lay in his bunk analyzing every detail of the conversation. Alice's appearance, Roxanne's behavior, the timing of the call's termination, everything suggested a situation that demanded immediate investigation. He accessed his personal laptop and began systematic research into his family's situation. Bank records showed unusual spending patterns, money being withdrawn in large amounts while routine expenses like groceries appeared neglected. Credit card statements revealed purchases at restaurants and bars he'd never heard of, often in the company of someone whose name appeared repeatedly, Wendell Cox. Santiago's military training had taught him to gather complete intelligence before taking action. Over the next week, he used his security clearance and investigative skills to build a comprehensive picture of his wife's activities. Wendell Cox was 38, divorced, and worked as a marketing consultant for various small businesses. His social media profile showed him as a smooth-talking charmer who favored expensive clothes and flashy cars he couldn't quite afford. More troubling, Cox had a history of targeting military wives during their husbands' deployments. Phone records revealed daily communications between Roxanne and Cox, often lasting hours while Santiago was in the field. Financial analysis showed money being diverted from Alice's needs to support an increasingly expensive lifestyle that included dinners, hotel rooms, and purchases that suggested an extramarital relationship. But the most damning evidence came from social services records that Santiago accessed through official channels. The school had filed 3 reports about Alice's declining condition, weight loss, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and signs of neglect that suggested inadequate nutrition and supervision. Santiago stared at the final report, feeling fury build in his chest like a controlled explosion. While he risked his life protecting strangers in a foreign country, his wife was stealing food money from their daughter to fund an affair with a parasitic opportunist who preyed on military families. The betrayal cut deeper than enemy fire ever had. Santiago had survived combat by trusting his team absolutely, a trust that demanded absolute loyalty in return. Roxanne had violated that trust in the worst possible way, harming the one person Santiago valued above his own life. As Santiago began planning his response, one principle guided his thinking. There would be no forgiveness, no second chances, no mercy for anyone who harmed his daughter. The enemy had revealed themselves, and Santiago Ross was coming home to wage a war they couldn't possibly win. Chapter 2. The Call to War. The emergency came at 0347 hours local time, 3 weeks after Santiago had discovered his wife's betrayal. He was reviewing intelligence reports in the Tactical Operations Center when his personal phone rang with a call from an unknown Colorado number. "Is this Staff Sergeant Santiago Ross?" a woman's voice asked formally. "Speaking. This is Nurse Catherine Burns from Pinewood Elementary School. I'm calling about your daughter Alice Ross." Santiago felt his blood turn cold. "What's wrong?" "Sir, Alice collapsed during lunch period today. We've transported her to Memorial Hospital. The attending physician has diagnosed severe malnutrition and dehydration. Child Protective Services has been notified." The words hit Santiago like incoming artillery. "Severe malnutrition? How is that possible?" "Mr. Ross, when was the last time you spoke with your wife about Alice's care? The child appears to have been subsisting on inadequate nutrition for an extended period." Santiago heard voices in the background, and then Roxanne's unmistakable tone arguing with someone. The nurse apparently hadn't disconnected the call completely. "He's not my problem." Roxanne's voice carried clearly through the phone. "I sold his lunch money, so what?" Tell her soldier father to send more cash. Santiago's vision went red around the edges. His wife had just admitted to stealing their daughter's food money while speaking to school officials. Money that should have ensured Alice had proper nutrition while he was deployed defending his country. "Ma'am," Santiago said, his voice deadly calm, "I need you to understand something. I'm taking emergency leave immediately. I'll be on the next flight home." "Sir, Alice is stable now, but she'll need ongoing medical care and proper nutrition to recover." "She'll have everything she needs," Santiago interrupted. "And I need you to document exactly what my wife just said. Every word." "Yes, sir. I've already made notes for CPS." Santiago ended the call and immediately sought out his commanding officer. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Fritz was a career soldier who understood the complexities of family emergencies during deployment. "Sir, I need emergency leave. Family crisis." Fritz looked up from his paperwork, recognizing something lethal in Santiago's expression. "How bad?" "My 8-year-old daughter is hospitalized for malnutrition. My wife's been stealing her food money to fund an affair." Fritz's face hardened. "Emergency leave approved. How long do you need?" "However long it takes to fix the situation permanently." "Understood. Take care of your family, Ross. We'll handle things here." Santiago spent the 17-hour flight home planning his campaign with the same methodical precision he applied to military operations. This wasn't about saving his marriage that had ended the moment Roxanne chose another man over their daughter's welfare. This was about protecting Alice and ensuring her betrayers faced consequences for their crimes. He landed at Denver International Airport and drove directly to Memorial Hospital, where Alice lay in a pediatric bed connected to 4 fluids and nutritional supplements. The sight of his daughter, pale, thin, looking smaller than her 8 years, ignited a fury that Santiago carefully contained behind military discipline. "Daddy," Alice whispered when she saw him, her voice weak but relieved. "I'm here, sweetheart," Santiago said, taking her small hand in his larger one. "Everything's going to be okay now." Dr. Robert Herman, the attending physician, briefed Santiago on Alice's condition with clinical precision. "She's suffering from chronic malnutrition, dehydration, and vitamin deficiencies consistent with inadequate food intake over several months. We're providing immediate treatment, but full recovery will require proper nutrition and monitoring." "What kind of malnutrition?" Santiago asked, needing to understand the full scope of his daughter's suffering. "Protein-energy malnutrition, primarily. Her body weight is 15% below normal for her age and height. Blood work shows iron deficiency anemia and vitamin D insufficiency. She's been living on minimal calories for an extended period." Santiago absorbed this information with growing rage. While he'd been sending home his military pay to support his family, Roxanne had been starving their daughter to fund her affair. "Doctor, I need complete medical records documenting Alice's condition. Will you testify if legal proceedings require it?" Dr. Herman nodded gravely. "Absolutely. This level of childhood neglect constitutes abuse." Santiago's phone buzzed with a text from Roxanne. "Where are you?" "Alice is fine. Stop being dramatic." He ignored the message and instead called his emergency contact, his sister Marissa Ross, who lived 30 minutes from his family's home. "Santiago, I thought you were deployed. I'm home. Emergency. Can you meet me at Memorial Hospital immediately?" "Of course. What's wrong?" "Alice is hospitalized for malnutrition. I need someone I trust to stay with her while I handle the situation at home." Marissa arrived within an hour, her face showing shock when she saw Alice's condition. At 31, Marissa had followed Santiago's example of rising above their difficult childhood through education and hard work, becoming a successful paralegal with sharp instincts for legal strategy. "Who did this to her?" Marissa asked quietly, studying Alice's medical chart. "Roxanne. She's been stealing Alice's food money to fund an affair." Marissa's expression went cold. She shared Santiago's protective instincts when it came to family, and seeing Alice in this condition triggered the same ruthless anger that had made Santiago an effective soldier. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay with Alice. Document everything. Don't let Roxanne near her unsupervised." "Where are you going?" Santiago's smile held no warmth. "Home. To have a conversation with my wife." The drive to his suburban home took 23 minutes, during which Santiago finalized his strategy. He would gather evidence, secure Alice's future, and ensure Roxanne and her lover paid appropriate consequences for their betrayal. The house looked normal from the outside. Well-maintained lawn, neat exterior, the facade of a happy military family. Santiago used his key to enter quietly, immediately noticing changes that confirmed his suspicions. New furniture in the living room, expensive wine in the kitchen, men's clothing in the laundry room that didn't belong to him. The refrigerator contained alcohol and luxury items, while the pantry held minimal food suitable for a child. Santiago methodically photographed everything, building evidence with the thoroughness of a criminal investigator. In the bedroom, he found Roxanne's journal detailing her affair with Wendell Cox, including entries that showed callous disregard for Alice's needs. One entry, dated 2 weeks earlier, made Santiago's hands shake with controlled rage. W wants to go to Aspen this weekend. Need to convince Santiago to send more money. Alice keeps complaining about being hungry, but kids exaggerate everything. Santiago was reading when he heard the front door open. Roxanne entered with Wendell Cox, both obviously returning from an expensive lunch, while Alice lay malnourished in a hospital bed. Santiago, Roxanne called out, surprise evident in her voice. What are you doing here? Santiago emerged from the bedroom, carrying the journal and his phone displaying photos of the evidence he'd gathered. Roxanne went pale when she saw his expression, the cold, predatory look of someone who'd identified his targets and begun planning their destruction. We need to talk, Santiago said quietly. All three of us. Wendell Cox stepped forward with false confidence, apparently unaware that he was facing someone trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. Look, Ross, this is awkward, but adults sometimes. Santiago moved with combat speed, grabbing Cox by the throat and slamming him against the wall. The marketing consultant's eyes bulged as Santiago applied precise pressure to his windpipe. My daughter is hospitalized for malnutrition while you two steal her food money for dates, Santiago said conversationally. That makes you my enemy. Cox struggled weakly, his soft lifestyle no match for Santiago's military conditioning. Can't breathe. Good, Santiago said, releasing Cox to collapse gasping on the floor. Now you understand the rules. Roxanne stepped forward, trying to regain control through manipulation. Santiago, you're overreacting. Alice is fine. Alice is in the hospital, Santiago interrupted, his voice cutting through her lies. Severe malnutrition. The doctors say she's been starving for months. That's impossible. Santiago held up her journal, open to the damning entry. Your own words, Roxanne. Alice keeps complaining about being hungry, but kids exaggerate everything. Roxanne's face went white as she realized the scope of her exposure. You went through my private things. I investigated my daughter's attempted murder, Santiago corrected. Which is what this is. You stole food money from an 8-year-old child to fund your affair. Wendell Cox struggled to his feet, rubbing his throat. Look, man, I didn't know about any kid. Santiago's backhand sent Cox stumbling into the coffee table. You took money meant to feed my daughter. That makes you complicit. As Cox bled from his split lip, Santiago turned his full attention to Roxanne. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and leave. You'll never contact Alice again. And you're both going to pay for what you've done. You can't make me leave my own house, Roxanne said, trying to summon defiance. Santiago smiled, the expression terrifying in its complete absence of mercy. Watch me. The war for Alice's future had begun, and Santiago Ross intended to win completely. Chapter 3. Intelligence Gathering. Santiago's first tactical priority was securing Alice's immediate future while building an unassailable case against her abusers. He'd learned in Afghanistan that successful operations required overwhelming evidence and multiple attack vectors, lessons that applied perfectly to his domestic war. After forcing Roxanne and Wendell Cox to leave the house, Santiago spent the night cataloging evidence with military precision. He photographed the empty refrigerator and bare pantry, documented the expensive purchases that had drained Alice's food budget, and copied financial records that showed months of systematic neglect. His sister Marissa called from the hospital with updates that fueled his cold anger. Alice asked for food 3 times in 2 hours. The nurses say that's typical for malnourished children. They're afraid the food will disappear again. Santiago felt something break inside his chest. His daughter had been trained by hunger to hoard food, developing survival instincts that no 8-year-old should need. How's she responding to treatment? Better. They're starting her on solid foods tomorrow. But Santiago, she flinches when strangers approach. That's not normal. Santiago absorbed this information, adding psychological trauma to the list of crimes his wife and her lover would answer for. Any problems with Roxanne showing up? She tried. I told security to keep her out per your instructions. She wasn't happy. Good. I want her angry and making mistakes. Santiago's next call was to Trevor Lowry, a lawyer who specialized in military family law and had served as a JAG officer before entering private practice. Trevor understood the unique challenges faced by deployed soldiers and had a reputation for aggressive advocacy. Santiago, I heard through the grapevine you were back. How's Alice? That's why I'm calling. I need legal counsel for a custody case involving child endangerment. Trevor's tone sharpened immediately. How bad? Santiago summarized Alice's condition and the evidence he'd gathered, reading directly from Roxanne's journal entries and medical reports. Trevor listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his tactical understanding. This is criminal neglect, Trevor concluded. With your documentation and Alice's medical condition, we can pursue emergency custody and criminal charges simultaneously. What about Roxanne's rights? Parental rights can be terminated for abuse and neglect. Given the medical evidence and her own written admissions, she's facing potential prison time, not custody disputes. Santiago felt satisfaction at this confirmation. How quickly can we move? Emergency custody hearing tomorrow morning. I'll file criminal complaints with the district attorney's office this afternoon. Your wife's about to discover that neglecting a soldier's child has consequences. While Trevor prepared legal documents, Santiago focused on intelligence gathering about Wendell Cox. Military databases revealed that Cox had a pattern of targeting military wives during deployments, moving between base communities and exploiting vulnerable families. Cox's financial records, obtained through Santiago's investigative contacts, showed a lifestyle far beyond his reported income. He lived in an expensive apartment, drove a leased BMW, and maintained credit card debt that suggested he relied on others to fund his lifestyle. More interesting, Cox had been married twice before, both times to military wives who divorced their husbands during deployments. In each case, the divorced women had subsequently ended their relationships with Cox after depleting their divorce settlements. Santiago was building a psychological profile of his enemy when his phone rang with a call from an unlisted number. Santiago, we need to talk. Roxanne's voice was desperate and angry. You can't keep me from my daughter. Your daughter is recovering from the malnutrition you caused, Santiago replied coldly. You have nothing to say that I want to hear. I made mistakes, but Alice is still my child. You forfeited that claim when you stole her food money for dates with your boyfriend. It wasn't like that. You don't understand the pressure. Santiago's laugh held no humor. The pressure of stealing from an 8-year-old? Explain that to me. Roxanne's composure cracked. You were gone all the time. I was lonely, I needed. You needed to feed our daughter, Santiago interrupted. Everything else was secondary to that responsibility. Wendell says we can work this out. He has ideas. Wendell Cox is a predator who targets military families. He's used you to steal from my daughter, and now you're both going to pay for it. What do you mean, pay for it? Santiago's voice went arctic. You'll find out. He ended the call and immediately contacted Rick Flynn, a former Special Forces operator who now worked as a private investigator specializing in surveillance and security. Rick had served with Santiago in Afghanistan and understood the importance of protecting family from domestic threats. Santiago, good to hear from you. I thought you were deployed. Emergency leave. I need surveillance on 2 targets, my wife and her boyfriend. Full coverage, documentation of everything. Personal or professional? Both. They're facing criminal charges for child neglect. I want evidence of their activities while the case proceeds. Rick understood immediately. Counter-surveillance too? In case they try anything stupid. Affirmative. These people have shown they'll harm a child for money. I don't want any surprises. That evening, Santiago returned to the hospital to find Alice sitting up and eating solid food for the first time in weeks. Her color was better, though she still looked fragile compared to his memories of her healthy appearance. Daddy, are you staying home now? Alice asked as Santiago helped her with dinner. Yes, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere until you're completely better. Is Mommy coming back? Santiago studied his daughter's expression, looking for clues about her feelings toward Roxanne. What he saw surprised him. Alice looked more relieved than upset about her mother's absence. Do you want her to come back? Santiago asked carefully. Alice considered the question with 8-year-old seriousness. She got mad when I said I was hungry, and she liked Wendell more than me. Santiago felt rage build in his chest, but kept his voice gentle. Alice, none of that was your fault. Adults are supposed to take care of children, not the other way around. I know, Alice said simply. You always take care of me when you're home. The trust in her voice nearly broke Santiago's emotional control. His daughter had endured months of neglect and hunger, but she still believed her father would protect her. I'm going to make sure you're always safe, Santiago promised. No one will ever hurt you again. Alice nodded, accepting this assurance with the faith children place in parents who've earned their trust through consistent action. Dr. Herman approached with Alice's latest test results. Significant improvement already. Her body's responding well to proper nutrition. With continued care, she should make a full recovery. How long until she can come home? Few more days of monitoring. We want to ensure stable weight gain and nutrient absorption. Santiago nodded, then asked the question that mattered most. Doctor, will there be permanent effects from this level of malnutrition? Unlikely, given her age and the relatively short duration. Children are resilient, but the psychological impact of chronic hunger can take longer to resolve. Santiago absorbed this information, adding psychological trauma counseling to his list of expenses that Roxanne and Cox would ultimately pay. His phone buzzed with a text from Rick Flynn. Targets acquired. Interesting activities to report. Santiago stepped into the hallway to take Rick's call, leaving Marissa with Alice. What do you have? Your wife and Cox are staying at the Marriott downtown. They've been drinking heavily and arguing about money. Cox keeps talking about leaving town. Any indication they're planning to run? Possible. Cox made several calls about liquidating assets. Your wife's been calling lawyers, but most won't take the case after seeing the evidence. Santiago smiled grimly. Word was spreading through the legal community that Roxanne Ross had admitted to starving her daughter while her husband served overseas. Few attorneys would want their name associated with such a case. Continue surveillance. I want to know if they try to leave the state. Copy that. Santiago, there's something else. Cox has been making calls to other military wives. Looks like he's already hunting for his next target. Santiago's expression went predatory. Wendell Cox wasn't just a threat to his family. He was a serial predator who would continue victimizing military families until someone stopped him permanently. Document everything, Santiago instructed. I want a complete record of his activities. As Santiago returned to Alice's room, he felt the cold satisfaction of a successful reconnaissance mission. His enemies were isolated, their resources depleted, and their options narrowing. The next phase of his campaign would begin with legal warfare designed to destroy them systematically. Roxanne and Wendell Cox had chosen to wage war against his family. Now they would learn what happened when they fought a professional soldier who protected what he loved with absolute ruthlessness. The intelligence gathering phase was complete. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Chapter 4, The Legal Assault. The emergency custody hearing began at 9 a.m. sharp in Judge Dwayne Riggs' courtroom, a sterile environment where Santiago would wage the first formal battle for his daughter's future. Santiago arrived in his dress uniform, displaying his combat decorations and deployment ribbons, a calculated decision to remind everyone present that Alice's father had been serving his country while she was being neglected. Trevor Lowry had prepared their case with military precision, organizing evidence that told a devastating story of systematic child abuse. Medical records documented Alice's malnutrition. Financial statements showed money being diverted from childcare to fund an affair, and Roxanne's own journal entries provided damning admissions of her priorities. Roxanne entered with her hastily hired attorney, Bob Lindsay, a family law specialist who looked uncomfortable with the evidence he'd been given to defend. Wendell Cox was notably absent, apparently smart enough to avoid a courtroom where his role in child endangerment would be exposed. Judge Riggs reviewed the medical reports with the grim expression of someone who'd seen too many cases of child abuse. At 61, Riggs was a former prosecutor known for harsh sentences against anyone who harmed children. Mr. Lowry, present your client's case, Judge Riggs instructed. Trevor stood and delivered an opening statement that systematically destroyed any possible defense Roxanne might offer. He presented Alice's medical records, photographs of the empty refrigerator and pantry, bank statements showing luxury purchases while child support went unused, and journal entries that demonstrated callous indifference to his starving child. Your Honor, while Staff Sergeant Ross was deployed in Afghanistan defending our nation, his wife was systematically starving their 8-year-old daughter to fund an extramarital affair. The medical evidence shows chronic malnutrition that could have caused permanent developmental damage. Judge Riggs examined Roxanne's journal, reading several entries aloud that made her flinch with each word. Mrs. Ross, this is your handwriting? Yes, Your Honor, but those entries were taken out of context. What context justifies writing Alice keeps complaining about being hungry, but kids exaggerate everything, while spending her food money on restaurant meals with your boyfriend? Roxanne's attorney attempted damage control. Your Honor, my client acknowledges mistakes were made, but she never intended. Intent is irrelevant, Judge Riggs interrupted. The child was hospitalized for severe malnutrition. That's the result of Mrs. Ross's actions, regardless of her intentions. Santiago watched Roxanne's defense crumble with clinical satisfaction. Trevor had built an unassailable case that left no room for sympathy or excuses. Mr. Ross, Judge Riggs addressed Santiago directly. Where is your daughter currently? Still hospitalized, Your Honor. She's recovering from the malnutrition, but the doctors want to monitor her progress before discharge. And your plans for her care? I've taken extended leave from the Army to ensure Alice receives proper nutrition, medical care, and psychological support. My sister, a paralegal, is helping coordinate her recovery. Judge Riggs nodded approvingly. Mrs. Ross, do you have anything to say before I rule on emergency custody? Roxanne stood shakily, apparently realizing that her parental rights were about to be terminated. Your Honor, I love my daughter. I made mistakes, but I can learn. You starved an 8-year-old child, Judge Riggs said flatly. Love doesn't cause malnutrition. The ruling was swift and complete. Santiago received emergency full custody with supervised visitation rights for Roxanne, contingent on her compliance with court-ordered parenting classes and psychological evaluation. More importantly, Judge Riggs referred the case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. As they left the courthouse, Trevor briefed Santiago on the next phases of legal warfare. Criminal charges will likely include child endangerment, neglect, and possibly fraud for misusing child support. Roxanne's looking at 2 to 5 years if convicted. What about Cox? Harder to prosecute directly since he's not Alice's parent, but we can pursue conspiracy charges and civil liability. He knowingly participated in depriving a child of necessary resources. Santiago felt satisfaction as his legal strategy began producing results. But the courtroom victory was just the opening move in a larger campaign designed to destroy his enemies completely. His phone buzzed with updates from Rick Flynn's surveillance operation. Targets are panicking. Roxanne's been calling family for money. Cox is liquidating assets. They know they're in serious trouble. Any indication they're planning to flee? Cox bought airline tickets to Mexico for tomorrow night. Cash purchase, one-way tickets. Santiago's expression went cold. His wife's lover was planning to abandon her and flee the country rather than face consequences for his crimes. This cowardice would be useful in separating his enemies and dealing with them individually. Continue surveillance. Don't interfere with their travel plans yet. Santiago's next stop was the hospital, where Alice was showing remarkable improvement under proper medical care. Her color had returned to normal, her energy levels were increasing, and most importantly, her smile was genuine when she saw her father. Daddy, the doctor says I can go home tomorrow, Alice announced as Santiago helped her with lunch. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Are you excited? Yes, but... Alice hesitated, looking uncertain. But what? Is Mommy going to be there? Santiago sat beside his daughter's bed, choosing his words carefully. No, Alice. Mommy made some bad choices, and the judge decided you should live with me for now. Good, Alice said simply, surprising Santiago with her directness. She was mean when she was hungry, and she was hungry a lot. Santiago realized that his 8-year-old daughter had been more aware of the household dynamics than he'd understood. Alice had recognized that Roxanne's mood and treatment depended on circumstances beyond her control. Alice, I need you to understand something. What happened to you wasn't your fault. Adults are supposed to take care of children, not blame them for problems. Alice nodded solemnly. I know. You taught me that before you left. Santiago felt a surge of pride in his daughter's resilience and clarity. Despite months of neglect and psychological manipulation, Alice had maintained her sense of right and wrong. Dr. Herman approached with Alice's discharge paperwork. She's made excellent progress. Continue the nutritional supplements for another month, and we'll monitor her weight gain weekly. Any restrictions on activities? None. She can return to normal childhood activities as she feels comfortable. The psychological counseling appointments are scheduled for next week. As Santiago reviewed discharge instructions, his phone rang with a call from District Attorney Chester Jefferson, a decorated former Marine who took crimes against military families personally. Santiago, I've reviewed the evidence from this morning's hearing. We're filing criminal charges against your wife this afternoon. What charges specifically? Child endangerment in the first degree, criminal neglect, and fraud for misusing support payments. She's looking at serious prison time. And Wendell Cox? Conspiracy to commit child endangerment, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and accessory to fraud. Plus, we're exploring federal charges since this involved a deployed service member. Santiago smiled grimly. When do you arrest them? Tomorrow morning. We want to coordinate with your surveillance team to ensure we get both of them. Santiago ended the call and immediately contacted Rick Flynn. Change of plans. Cox and Roxanne are being arrested tomorrow morning. I want you positioned to document their reactions. Copy that. You want me to prevent Cox from fleeing tonight? Santiago considered this question carefully. Allowing Cox to flee would eliminate him as a threat, but might leave him free to victimize other military families. Ensuring his arrest would guarantee punishment, but require more complex coordination. Let him try to run, Santiago decided, but alert federal authorities about his flight plans. I want him arrested at the airport. Understood. This is going to be very satisfying to watch. As Santiago prepared to take Alice home the next day, he reflected on the first phase of his campaign. The legal system was moving efficiently to punish his daughter's abusers, but Santiago's personal sense of justice demanded more comprehensive consequences. Roxanne and Cox had chosen to wage war against his family while he served his country. Legal punishment would satisfy society's demands for justice, but Santiago's standards for retribution were more thorough. The formal legal assault was nearly complete. Tomorrow would begin the personal reckoning that would ensure his enemies understood the full cost of betraying a Special Forces soldier's family. Alice was safe, the law was on his side, and his enemies were about to discover that escape was impossible. The next phase of Santiago's war would be far more personal. Chapter 5. The Net Titans. The arrests began at dawn, coordinated between local police and federal agents to ensure neither target could warn the other. Santiago watched from Rick Flynn's surveillance van as Roxanne was taken into custody at the Marriott, her shocked protests about not understanding the charges falling on deaf ears as officers read her rights. Wendell Cox's arrest at Denver International Airport was more dramatic. Federal agents intercepted him at the gate, his one-way ticket to Mexico proving intent to flee prosecution. Santiago felt cold satisfaction watching his daughter's abuser realize that escape was impossible. Both targets in custody, Rick reported. Cox is looking at federal charges now. Interstate flight to avoid prosecution. Santiago nodded, pleased with how the legal net was tightening around his enemies. But arrest was just the beginning of their punishment. True justice required comprehensive destruction of their ability to harm other families. Alice's homecoming that afternoon was a quiet celebration. Santiago had spent the morning preparing the house, stocking the kitchen with healthy food, removing all traces of Roxanne and Cox's presence, and creating a safe environment where his daughter could begin healing. It feels different, Alice observed as she walked through the living room. How so? Calmer. Like nobody's angry anymore. Santiago realized that his 8-year-old daughter had been living in a household charged with tension and conflict during his deployment. Roxanne's affair and financial deception had created an atmosphere of stress that Alice had absorbed without understanding its source. You're safe now, Santiago assured her. Nobody's going to be angry at you for being hungry or needing things. Alice nodded, accepting this promise with the trust children place in parents who consistently protect them. Santiago's phone rang with a call from District Attorney Jefferson. Both suspects are in custody and being processed. Roxanne's asking for a deal already. What kind of deal? Testimony against Cox in exchange for reduced charges. She's claiming he manipulated her into the financial fraud. Santiago felt disgust at his wife's attempt to shift blame. She wrote in her own journal about stealing Alice's food money. That's not manipulation, that's choice. Agreed. We're not offering any deals until they provide something substantial. Right now, the evidence convicts them both without cooperation. Santiago ended the call and turned his attention to the next phase of his campaign, ensuring his enemy's destruction extended beyond criminal penalties. Legal punishment would satisfy official justice, but Santiago's personal standards demanded more comprehensive consequences. He called Van Dunbar, a financial investigator who specialized in asset recovery and had served as a military police officer. Van understood the importance of protecting soldiers' families from financial predators. Santiago, heard you were back stateside. How can I help? I need a complete financial analysis of Wendell Cox's activities. Income, expenses, debts, and any assets that might be seized for restitution. Personal or professional interest? Both. Cox helped steal money meant to feed my daughter. I want everything he owns converted to paying for her recovery. Van's voice hardened immediately. Send me what you have. I'll tear apart his finances piece by piece. Santiago transmitted the financial records he'd gathered, along with bank statements showing how Cox had benefited from money stolen from Alice's care. Van's expertise would identify every asset that could be claimed for restitution. His next call was to his sister Marissa, who had been researching legal strategies for maximizing civil penalties against both defendants. Santiago, I found something interesting. Colorado has a civil liability statute for crimes against children. You can sue both Roxanne and Cox for Alice's medical expenses, psychological counseling, and punitive damages. How much are we talking about? Medical costs alone will be substantial: hospitalization, ongoing treatment, counseling. But the punitive damages could reach 6 figures each, especially given the deliberate nature of their actions. Santiago smiled grimly. Criminal prosecution would impose prison sentences, but civil litigation would ensure financial destruction that lasted long after their release. File the suits. I want both of them to understand that harming Alice will cost them everything they own. That evening, Santiago focused on Alice's recovery routine: nutritious dinner, help with homework she'd missed during hospitalization, and bedtime stories that re-established their normal father-daughter relationship. Daddy, Alice asked as Santiago tucked her in, why did Mommy stop feeding me? The question cut through Santiago's heart. His 8-year-old daughter was trying to understand adult betrayal that shouldn't exist in any child's world. Sometimes adults make very bad choices, Santiago explained carefully. Mommy chose things that were more important to her than taking care of you. Like Wendell. Santiago was struck by Alice's perceptive understanding of the situation. Yes, she chose Wendell over her responsibility to you. Are you going to choose something more important than me? The question revealed Alice's deepest fear, that her father might abandon her the way her mother had. Santiago knelt beside her bed, meeting her eyes directly. Alice, nothing in the world is more important to me than you. Not work, not money, not other people. You are my most important job. Alice smiled, accepting this assurance with visible relief. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. Forever and always. As Alice drifted off to sleep, Santiago's phone buzzed with updates from his network of investigators. Wendell Cox's financial empire was collapsing under scrutiny. His assets were largely financed through debt. His income was sporadic, and his lifestyle had been supported by money stolen from military families. More damaging, Rick Flynn had uncovered evidence that Cox was operating a systematic scheme to target military wives during deployments. He'd cultivated relationships with multiple women, extracting money and resources before moving on to new victims. Santiago, this guy's been running the same scam for years, Rick reported. At least 6 military families we can document, probably more. He specifically targets wives of deployed soldiers. Santiago felt cold fury at this revelation. Cox wasn't just an opportunist who'd taken advantage of Roxanne's loneliness. He was a serial predator who deliberately destroyed military families for profit. Document everything. I want federal authorities to understand they're dealing with a career criminal. Already on it. FBI's interested in the interstate pattern. This could become a federal racketeering case. Santiago's personal war was expanding into something larger, a campaign to protect all military families from predators like Wendell Cox. His daughter's suffering would serve a greater purpose by exposing and stopping a systematic threat to the military community. The next morning brought news that would accelerate Santiago's timeline. Trevor Lowery called with updates from the prosecutor's office. Roxanne's lawyer is pushing hard for a plea bargain. She's offering to testify against Cox and provide evidence about his other victims. What does she want in exchange? Minimum sentence, possibly probation instead of prison time. Santiago felt rage build in his chest. She starved my daughter for months. There's no deal that makes that acceptable. I agree, but the prosecutor wants to hear what she knows about Cox's other crimes. It might help protect other families. Santiago considered this dilemma carefully. His personal desire for maximum punishment conflicted with the opportunity to expose Cox's broader criminal activities. Set up a meeting. I want to hear exactly what she's offering before anyone makes decisions. As Santiago prepared for the most difficult conversation of the campaign, he reflected on how his enemy's desperation was creating opportunities for even greater victory. Roxanne's willingness to betray Cox demonstrated the same selfish priorities that had led her to neglect Alice. The net was tightening around both targets, but Santiago's ultimate goal remained unchanged: complete destruction of anyone who'd harmed his daughter, regardless of their relationships or excuses. Justice demanded nothing less than total victory. Chapter 6: The Betrayal. The meeting with Roxanne took place in the secure conference room at the district attorney's office, supervised by attorneys and designed to ensure no direct contact between Santiago and the woman who'd betrayed their family. Santiago sat across from his wife, studying the changes that guilt and desperation had wrought in her appearance. Roxanne looked haggard, her carefully maintained beauty replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone facing prison. She avoided Santiago's gaze, focusing instead on her attorney Bob Lindsay, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable with his client's position. Mrs. Ross, District Attorney Jefferson began formally. You're offering testimony against Wendell Cox in exchange for consideration on your sentencing. Explain what information you can provide. Roxanne's voice shook as she began her confession. Wendell told me he'd done this before, targeted military wives while their husbands were deployed. He said soldiers' wives were easy marks because they were lonely and had access to steady income. Santiago felt ice form in his veins. His wife had known she was part of a deliberate scheme to prey on military families. Did he mention specific victims? Jefferson asked. 3 that I know of. Jennifer Wagner at Fort Carson, Lisa Herman at Peterson Air Force Base, and another woman at Buckley whose name I don't remember. He showed me pictures sometimes, bragging about how much money he'd gotten from them. Trevor Lowery leaned forward. Mrs. Ross, you're admitting you knew Wendell Cox was deliberately targeting military families for financial exploitation? Yes, Roxanne whispered, the admission damning her completely. Santiago's hands clenched into fists as he processed his wife's knowledge of Cox's predatory behavior. She hadn't been a naive victim. She'd been a willing participant in a scheme she knew was designed to destroy military families. What about Alice's condition? Jefferson continued. When did you realize she was malnourished? Roxanne's composure cracked. I knew she was losing weight, but I told myself it wasn't that serious. You told yourself stealing her food money wasn't serious? Santiago spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through her attempted justification. Roxanne finally met his eyes, and what Santiago saw there destroyed any remaining possibility of mercy. There was no genuine remorse, only fear of consequences and anger at being caught. Santiago, you don't understand the pressure I was under. The pressure of choosing between feeding our daughter and funding your affair with a con artist? Santiago's voice was deadly quiet. Explain that pressure to me. You were gone all the time. I was alone. I had needs. Alice's needs came first, Santiago interrupted. That was your only job while I was defending our country. Roxanne's mask slipped completely. Easy for you to say. You got to play soldier while I dealt with reality. Reality was an 8-year-old girl slowly starving while you stole her food money, Santiago said flatly. Everything else was your selfishness. Bob Lindsay attempted damage control. Mr. Jefferson, my client is clearly emotional. Your client is revealing her true character, Trevor observed. She's more angry about being caught than remorseful about harming a child. Santiago studied his wife's expression, seeing clearly the woman she'd always been beneath the facade of military spouse and mother. Roxanne had never truly accepted responsibility for Alice's welfare. She'd seen their daughter as an obligation that interfered with her personal desires. Mrs. Ross, Jefferson continued, are you willing to testify that Wendell Cox deliberately targets military families for financial exploitation? Yes. And that you participated knowingly in this scheme? Roxanne hesitated, realizing the implications of full admission. I was manipulated. You just testified that Cox told you about previous victims and showed you pictures, Trevor pointed out. That's not manipulation. That's recruitment into conspiracy. Santiago watched his wife's defense collapse in real time. Her attempt to blame Cox while minimizing her own culpability was destroying any possibility of leniency. What sentence are you requesting in exchange for this testimony? Jefferson asked. Bob Lindsay conferred quietly with Roxanne before responding. Probation with community service and mandatory counseling. Santiago's laugh held no humor. She starved an 8-year-old child, and you want probation. Mr. Ross, Jefferson said formally, you'll have opportunity to provide victim impact testimony during sentencing. For now, we're evaluating the usefulness of Mrs. Ross's information. Santiago nodded, understanding the prosecutorial strategy while maintaining his position that no deal could justify Roxanne's crimes. I need to hear Cox's side before making any agreements, Jefferson concluded. Mrs. Ross, you'll remain in custody pending trial. As the meeting ended, Santiago caught Roxanne's final desperate attempt at manipulation. Santiago, please. Think about Alice. She needs her mother. Santiago's response was delivered with the cold finality of a military execution order. Alice needed her mother when she was starving. You chose Wendell Cox over our daughter. She doesn't need someone who would steal food from a child. Roxanne's face crumpled as she realized her husband would never forgive her betrayal. The woman who'd expected emotional manipulation to work was discovering that Santiago's protective instincts toward Alice outweighed any residual feelings for their marriage. Outside the courthouse, Trevor briefed Santiago on the legal implications of Roxanne's testimony. Her information about Cox's other victims strengthens the federal case significantly. FBI's already contacted the women she mentioned. What about her sentencing? Jefferson won't offer probation after seeing her attitude today. She's looking at 3 to 5 years minimum, regardless of cooperation. Santiago felt satisfaction at this confirmation. Roxanne's own words had destroyed any possibility of leniency by revealing her knowing participation in Cox's predatory scheme. His phone buzzed with a call from Rick Flynn. Santiago, Cox is ready to talk. Apparently, he thinks he can cut a deal by blaming everything on Roxanne. Santiago smiled grimly. Set it up. I want to hear what lies he's prepared to tell. The stage was set for the final confrontation between Santiago and the man who'd helped destroy his family. Cox's desperation would create opportunities to extract maximum punishment while protecting other military families from future victimization. The war was entering its final phase, and Santiago intended to emerge with complete victory over the enemies who dared to harm his daughter. Chapter 7. The Hunter's Justice. Wendell Cox entered the interrogation room in federal custody shackles, his smooth confidence replaced by the desperate calculation of a cornered predator. Santiago observed from behind one-way glass as FBI agent Bruce Marquez and District Attorney Jefferson prepared to question the man who'd systematically targeted military families. Cox's appearance showed the stress of 3 days in federal detention. His expensive clothes replaced by orange jumpsuit, his carefully styled hair disheveled, his practiced charm nowhere to be found. Santiago felt cold satisfaction watching his daughter's abuser reduced to exactly what he was, a pathetic criminal facing overwhelming evidence. Mr. Cox, Agent Marquez began, you're facing federal charges including conspiracy to defraud military families, interstate transportation of stolen funds, and contributing to child endangerment. These charges carry 20 to 30 years in federal prison. Cox's lawyer, Christoph Wagner, was a federal defender who'd been assigned the case after 3 private attorneys refused to represent him. Wagner looked like a man who knew his client was guilty and hoped to minimize damage rather than win acquittal. My client is prepared to cooperate fully with federal authorities, Wagner announced. Mr. Cox has information about other criminal activities that might be valuable to ongoing investigations. Santiago leaned forward, interested in what lies Cox would tell to save himself. The man who'd taken money meant to feed Alice was about to reveal his true character under pressure. What information are you offering? Jefferson asked. Cox cleared his throat nervously. Roxanne Ross planned everything. She contacted me specifically because she knew I had experience with military relationships. She wanted to steal money from her husband and needed someone to help her hide it. Santiago felt rage build as Cox attempted to portray himself as Roxanne's victim rather than her co-conspirator. The man had no shame about lying to escape responsibility for child abuse. Mr. Cox, Agent Marquez consulted his files. We have evidence that you targeted at least 6 military wives over the past 3 years. How does that support your claim that Mrs. Ross initiated contact? Cox's composure slipped. Those other situations were different. Different how? You systematically identified deployed soldiers' wives, cultivated relationships with them, and extracted money meant for family support. That's a pattern of predatory behavior. Santiago watched Cox realize that law enforcement understood the full scope of his criminal activities. The federal investigation had expanded far beyond Alice's case to encompass his entire operation. I want to make a deal, Cox said desperately. I can give you names, dates, financial records. There are other people involved in targeting military families. Agent Marquez exchanged glances with Jefferson. What other people? There's a network. Guys who share information about deployment schedules, family finances, vulnerable targets. I can give you everything. Santiago felt a chill of recognition. Cox wasn't just an individual predator. He was part of an organized conspiracy to exploit military families. This revelation transformed the case from personal revenge into national security threat. Names, Jefferson demanded. Cox provided a list of associates who specialized in various aspects of military family exploitation, identity theft, financial fraud, relationship manipulation, and resource extraction. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering in its systematic approach to destroying families of deployed service members. How many families have been victimized? Agent Marquez asked. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. We kept records to avoid targeting the same families twice. Santiago felt murderous rage at this casual admission of systematic child abuse. Cox and his network had treated military families like resources to be harvested, with no consideration for the children who suffered when family support was stolen. Agent Marquez leaned forward. Mr. Cox, you're describing a criminal enterprise that specifically targets families of deployed military personnel. That's domestic terrorism. Cox went pale as he realized the implications of his admissions. I didn't think of it that way. It was financial stuff, not terrorism. Deliberately targeting military families to undermine support networks during deployment is exactly terrorism, Jefferson said coldly. You're looking at federal terrorism charges on top of everything else. Santiago smiled grimly as Cox's attempt to bargain his way out of punishment backfired spectacularly. The man's desperation to blame others had revealed a conspiracy that would ensure life sentences for everyone involved. What are you offering in exchange for this information? Wagner asked weakly. Nothing, Agent Marquez replied flatly. Mr. Cox has admitted to leading a conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. We'll use his information to identify other members, but he's not getting reduced charges for revealing crimes that make his situation worse. Cox's face crumpled as he realized that cooperation wouldn't save him from the consequences of his actions. The man who'd stolen food money from an 8-year-old girl was about to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Santiago left the observation room and walked to the parking garage, where Rick Flynn was waiting with additional intelligence about Cox's network. Santiago, this is bigger than we thought. FBI's already identified 12 members of Cox's organization across 6 states. They've been systematically targeting military families for years. How many children were affected? Preliminary count is over 30 families with children who suffered neglect or abuse when family support was diverted. Alice wasn't Cox's first victim. She was just the one who got him caught. Santiago felt validation for his decision to pursue maximum punishment rather than accepting plea bargains. Cox's network had harmed dozens of military children, making Alice's suffering part of a larger pattern of systematic abuse. What happens next? Federal task force is being formed to investigate the entire network. Your evidence against Cox is being used as the foundation for prosecuting the whole conspiracy. Santiago nodded, satisfied that his personal war had expanded into something that would protect all military families from similar predators. His phone rang with a call from Alice's school counselor, Catherine Burns. Mr. Ross, Alice had an excellent day today. She's participating in class again, and her appetite seems completely normal. Any behavioral concerns? None. She's resilient, and knowing she's safe seems to have restored her confidence. The counseling sessions are helping her process what happened. Santiago felt pride in his daughter's strength and recovery. Alice was proving that she'd inherited his ability to survive trauma and emerge stronger. That evening, Santiago helped Alice with homework while monitoring news reports about the federal investigation into military family exploitation. The conspiracy Cox had revealed was making national headlines as law enforcement agencies coordinated arrests across multiple states. "Daddy," Alice asked during dinner, "are Mommy and Wendell going to prison?" "Yes, sweetheart. They hurt you, and people who hurt children go to prison." "Good," Alice said simply. "I don't want them to hurt other kids like they hurt me." Santiago was struck by his daughter's mature understanding of justice. At 8 years old, Alice grasped that punishment wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting other children from similar harm. "You're right," Santiago agreed. "That's exactly why they're going to prison." As Alice prepared for bed, Santiago reflected on how completely his enemies had been defeated. Roxanne faced years in prison for child abuse and conspiracy. Cox faced life imprisonment for domestic terrorism. Their entire network was being dismantled by federal authorities. Most importantly, Alice was safe, healthy, and surrounded by people who would never allow her to be harmed again. Santiago Ross had waged war against the enemies who threatened his family, and he had won completely. The final phase would be ensuring that victory lasted forever. Chapter 8: Total Destruction. 6 months after the arrests, Santiago stood in the federal courthouse watching Wendell Cox receive his sentence for domestic terrorism and conspiracy to exploit military families. Judge Jordan Boyle, a veteran himself, showed no mercy as he delivered justice that would satisfy even Santiago's exacting standards. "Mr. Cox, you and your associates deliberately targeted the families of deployed service members, causing systematic harm to military children while their fathers and mothers served our country. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." Santiago felt deep satisfaction as Cox collapsed in his chair, the reality of permanent imprisonment destroying his last hope of escape. The man who'd stolen food money from Alice would die in federal prison, never again free to harm military families. Roxanne's sentencing had occurred the previous week, resulting in 15 years for child endangerment, conspiracy, and fraud. Santiago had provided victim impact testimony that left no doubt about his daughter's suffering and his wife's complete responsibility for it. "Your Honor," Santiago had testified, "my wife chose to steal food money from our 8-year-old daughter to fund an affair with a career criminal. When Alice was hospitalized for malnutrition, Roxanne showed no remorse, only anger at being caught. She forfeited any claim to mercy when she decided our daughter's life was less important than her selfish desires." Judge Boyle had imposed the maximum sentence possible, noting that Roxanne's behavior toward Alice represented the worst betrayal of parental responsibility this court has witnessed. Alice, now thriving under Santiago's care, had not asked to see her mother during the sentencing hearings. The girl who'd once loved Roxanne unconditionally had accepted that her mother was a criminal who'd chosen to harm her own child. "Daddy," Alice had asked after Roxanne's sentencing, "will she try to contact me when she gets out of prison?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," Santiago had replied. "But if she does, you'll be old enough to decide for yourself whether you want any relationship with someone who starved you as a child." Alice had nodded, satisfied with this arrangement. At 9 years old, she understood that trust, once broken by child abuse, could never be rebuilt. The civil litigation Santiago had pursued in parallel with criminal prosecution was equally successful. Van Dunbar's financial investigation had identified every asset owned by both Roxanne and Cox, resulting in judgments that would compensate Alice for medical expenses, counseling costs, and punitive damages. Complete financial victory, Van reported as they reviewed the final settlement documents. Cox's assets were seized to pay restitution. Cars, properties, investment accounts, everything. Roxanne's share of marital assets goes to Alice's education fund. Santiago smiled grimly. His enemies would emerge from prison with nothing, ensuring they could never rebuild their lives or threaten other families. The federal investigation into Cox's network had resulted in 43 arrests across 12 states, dismantling an organization that had systematically exploited military families for over a decade. Santiago's evidence against Cox had provided the foundation for prosecuting the entire conspiracy. FBI agent Marquez had briefed Santiago on the investigation scope during a classified meeting at Peterson Air Force Base. Your case broke open the largest domestic terrorism network targeting military families in U.S. history. Over 200 families were victimized, with dozens of children suffering neglect or abuse similar to Alice's experience. Santiago had felt validation for his decision to pursue maximum punishment rather than accepting compromise solutions. Alice's suffering had served a greater purpose by exposing and destroying a threat to military families nationwide. What's the final body count? Santiago had asked. 18 life sentences, 47 convictions resulting in 20-plus years, and complete disruption of their operational network. They'll never threaten military families again. As Santiago reviewed the aftermath of his campaign, he reflected on the completeness of his victory. Every enemy who'd harmed Alice was either dead, imprisoned for life, or facing decades behind bars. Their financial resources had been seized to compensate his daughter. Their criminal network had been dismantled by federal authorities. Most importantly, Alice was thriving under Santiago's protection. She'd returned to school with renewed confidence, formed new friendships with children whose families understood her experience, and showed no lasting psychological damage from her ordeal. "Daddy," Alice said one evening as they prepared dinner together, "I'm glad Mommy went to prison." Santiago paused in his cooking, surprised by his daughter's directness. "Why is that, sweetheart?" "Because now other kids won't get hurt like I did. And because I know you'll never let anyone hurt me again." Santiago felt overwhelming pride in his daughter's moral clarity. Alice understood that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. "You're right," Santiago agreed. "And you're safe forever now." "I know," Alice said simply. "You always protect the people you love." Santiago's phone rang with a call from his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Fritz. "Santiago, I've got new orders for you. Pentagon wants you for a classified assignment protecting military families from domestic threats." Santiago felt interest in this development. "What kind of assignment?" "Counterintelligence work focused on identifying and disrupting threats to military dependence. Your experience with the Cox investigation makes you perfect for the job." Santiago considered this opportunity carefully. The work would use his investigative skills and protective instincts while keeping him stateside to care for Alice. "I'm interested." "When do they need an answer?" "Next week. It's a promotion to Master Sergeant and permanent assignment to Colorado Springs. You'd be protecting military families professionally." Santiago smiled at the symmetry of this opportunity. His personal war to protect Alice had evolved into a career protecting all military families from similar threats. That night, Santiago tucked Alice into bed and reflected on how completely their lives had been transformed. Where once they'd been victims of betrayal and exploitation, they were now secure, prosperous, and surrounded by people who valued loyalty and protection. "Daddy," Alice asked as Santiago turned off her bedroom light, "are you happy now?" Santiago considered the question seriously. "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe. We're together, and the people who hurt you can never hurt anyone again." "That makes me very happy." "Me too," Alice agreed. "I love our family now." Santiago understood what she meant. Their original family had included people who'd chosen selfish desires over Alice's welfare. Their current family consisted of people who'd proved their loyalty through actions rather than words. "I love our family too," Santiago agreed. "Forever and always." As Alice drifted off to sleep, Santiago reviewed the complete victory he'd achieved through systematic warfare against his enemies. Roxanne and Cox would spend decades in prison, Their criminal network had been destroyed, and Alice was safe under his permanent protection. The man who'd received that devastating phone call about his daughter's malnutrition had responded with the full fury of a special forces soldier protecting his family. His enemies had learned too late that betraying Santiago Ross's trust meant facing consequences they couldn't escape or survive. Justice had been served completely, and the future belonged to Santiago and Alice Ross, a family built on loyalty, protection, and love that could never be broken by betrayal. The war was over. Santiago had won everything that mattered. Chapter 9, Legacy. 5 years after the phone call that changed everything, Master Sergeant Santiago Ross stood before a packed auditorium at the Pentagon, delivering a briefing on domestic threats to military families. His daughter Alice, now 13 and thriving, watched from the audience as her father presented intelligence that would protect thousands of military children from the kind of abuse she'd survived. Santiago's new assignment with the Military Family Protection Task Force had evolved from his personal experience into a national security priority. The investigation that began with Alice's malnutrition had identified systematic vulnerabilities in how the military protected dependents during deployments. Ladies and gentlemen, Santiago addressed the gathering of senior officers and Pentagon officials. The Cox Network represents only one example of organized exploitation targeting military families. Our current intelligence indicates at least 12 similar organizations operating nationwide. The presentation detailed how predators specifically targeted military spouses during deployments, using loneliness and financial stress to manipulate vulnerable families. Santiago's recommendations for enhanced protection protocols were based on hard-earned knowledge of how such attacks could be prevented and disrupted. Admiral Nicholas West, the Joint Chiefs representative, asked the question Santiago had been expecting. Master Sergeant Ross, your personal experience drives this research. How do we ensure objectivity in threat assessment? Santiago's answer reflected years of professional development beyond his initial desire for revenge. Sir, my experience provides insight into predator methodologies that pure academic research cannot duplicate. We understand enemy tactics because we've defeated them operationally. The Admiral nodded approvingly. Santiago's evolution from vengeful father to professional protector of military families had earned respect throughout the Pentagon hierarchy. After the briefing, Santiago met Alice for lunch at their favorite restaurant near the base. At 13, Alice had grown into a confident young woman who combined her father's analytical mind with a mature understanding of justice and protection. How did the presentation go? Alice asked as they reviewed the menu. Very well. They're approving funding for expanded family protection programs. Good, Alice said simply. Other kids shouldn't have to go through what I did. Santiago marveled at his daughter's consistent focus on protecting others rather than dwelling on her own traumatic experience. Alice had inherited his protective instincts while developing a wisdom that impressed adults who knew her story. Alice, I want you to know how proud I am of how you've handled everything. You chose to help other children by telling the truth about what happened to you. Alice considered this comment with characteristic seriousness. I had to tell the truth. Lies protect bad people and hurt good people. Santiago felt deep satisfaction in his daughter's moral clarity. The girl who'd exposed her mother's crimes at age 8 had developed into a young woman with unshakable principles. Their conversation was interrupted by Santiago's secure phone. His deputy, Rick Flynn, was calling with updates from an ongoing operation in North Carolina. Santiago, we got them. Entire network targeting Marine families at Camp Lejeune. Your protocols identified the operation before any children were seriously harmed. Santiago smiled at this confirmation that his professional methods were preventing other families from experiencing Alice's suffering. How many families were targeted? 15, but we intervened before significant damage occurred. The children are safe, and the predators are facing federal terrorism charges. Santiago felt the deep satisfaction of mission success. Each operation that protected military children validated his decision to transform personal experience into professional expertise. Outstanding work. Brief me on the details when I return. As Santiago ended the call, Alice watched him with the perceptive understanding she developed about her father's work. You saved more families, she observed. We prevented them from being hurt in the first place, Santiago confirmed. That's better than saving them afterward. Alice nodded. understanding the distinction between prevention and rescue. Her father's current mission focused on stopping threats before they could harm military children. That evening, Santiago and Alice attended the graduation ceremony for her advanced placement program. At 13, Alice was already taking high school-level courses while maintaining perfect grades and participating in school activities. Several teachers approached Santiago during the reception, praising Alice's academic performance and mature attitude toward learning. Mr. Ross, her science teacher, commented, "Alice has remarkable analytical skills for her age. She approaches problems with unusual systematic thinking." Santiago felt pride in his daughter's intellectual development. Alice had inherited his methodical approach to complex challenges while adding creative elements that promised even greater future success. "She's learned to solve problems thoroughly," Santiago agreed. "Alice doesn't accept partial solutions to important issues." The teacher nodded admiringly. "That's a valuable skill for someone her age." As they drove home, Alice asked the question Santiago had been expecting for months. "Dad, do you think I should follow your path? Military service and protecting families?" Santiago considered his response carefully. Alice had grown up understanding the importance of service and protection, but he wanted her to choose her own mission rather than simply following his example. "What matters to you most?" Santiago asked. "Making sure children are safe," Alice replied without hesitation. "I want to stop bad people from hurting kids who can't protect themselves." Santiago felt overwhelming pride in his daughter's chosen purpose. The girl who'd survived systematic abuse had dedicated herself to preventing other children from experiencing similar harm. "There are many ways to protect children," Santiago said. "Military service, law enforcement, medicine, psychology, law. What calls to you?" Alice thought carefully before responding. "I want to understand how bad people think so I can predict what they'll do. Psychology, maybe, but focused on protecting victims." Santiago nodded approvingly. Alice's interest in criminal psychology would serve her well in understanding and defeating threats to vulnerable populations. "We'll support whatever path you choose," Santiago assured her. "Your mission is protecting children. How you accomplish that mission is your decision." "Thanks, Dad. I know you'll always support me." As they arrived home, Santiago reflected on the complete transformation their lives had undergone since that devastating phone call 5 years earlier. Where once they'd been victims of betrayal and abuse, they were now protectors of military families nationwide. Alice was thriving academically and emotionally, showing no lasting damage from her traumatic experience. Instead, she'd used that experience to develop empathy and determination to protect other children. Santiago's career had evolved from personal revenge into professional service that protected thousands of military families from systematic exploitation. His enemies' crimes had inadvertently created expertise that served national security interests. Most importantly, their family unit had emerged stronger than before, built on genuine love and mutual protection rather than biological obligation. Their relationship represented everything family should be. "Dad," Alice said as they prepared for bed, "I want you to know something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I'm grateful for everything that happened. Not the bad parts, but how you handled them. You showed me that good people protect each other and bad people face consequences." Santiago felt emotion tighten his throat. "Alice, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Protecting you taught me who I really am. And protecting other families is who you're supposed to be," Alice observed. "It all worked out the way it should." Santiago marveled at his daughter's mature perspective on their shared experience. She understood that their trauma had been transformed into purpose that served something greater than personal satisfaction. As Alice settled into sleep, Santiago reviewed the complete victory he'd achieved through unwavering commitment to protecting what mattered most. His enemies were either dead or serving life sentences. Their criminal networks had been dismantled. Military families nationwide were safer because of intelligence gained through Alice's suffering. Most importantly, Santiago Ross had raised a daughter who would continue the mission of protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. Alice would carry forward the lessons learned through their shared ordeal, ensuring that future generations of children would be safer. The phone call that had shattered Santiago's world had ultimately created something better, a family united by purpose, a career dedicated to service, and a legacy of protection that would endure long after Santiago's retirement. Justice had been served completely. The mission would continue forever. Santiago Ross had won everything that truly mattered, and his victory would protect countless families he would never meet. The legacy was secured. The war was won. The future belonged to protectors like Alice Ross, who understood that love means never allowing harm to reach those you're sworn to defend.